Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Clay, and I am the Bucks believer. I want to start by saying that the Bucks should not have lost this game. Milwaukee got off to a great start in the first quarter as they jumped out to an early 12-2 lead behind some good offense and aggressive defense. That hot play continued throughout the first half as the Bucks entered halftime with a comfortable 59-43 lead. That lead was, in large part, squandered in the third quarter alone. Milwaukee reverted back to old habits on offense and defense in that quarter. Offensively, their stars tried to do too much attacking one-on-one instead of running actions that would force switches and create advantages for the Bucks offense. And defensively, there were even more problems as the Bucks overhelped off shooters, played a drop coverage that allowed Kevin Durant to get hot, and the Nets role players as well as Durant himself really made the Bucks pay. In that third quarter, Milwaukee's lead was cut down from 16 points to 6. Then, in the fourth, Kevin Durant took over. The Nets star couldn't miss regardless of how the Nets defended him, and he ended up taking Brooklyn to a 114-108 victory to give the Nets a 3-2 lead in this series. KD had a legendary performance in a game where he didn't rest a single second as he played all 48 minutes. He had 49 points, 17 rebounds, and 10 assists, which was the first 45-point, 15-rebound, 10-assist triple-double in playoff history. Durant was remarkably efficient for Brooklyn in this game as he shot 16 for 23 from the field, 4 for 9 from the three-point line, and 13 for 16 from the free throw line. The biggest reason in the first half why Durant was able to get going was that the refs called the game quite differently than they did in both games 3 and 4, where we saw KD struggle a little bit. Because of that change in officiating, PJ Tucker, who was the Bucks' best defender by far on KD in games 3 and 4, was not nearly as effective. That's because PJ likes to play a physical brand of defense, and he's going to be right in Durant's face, creating some contact and making sure KD can't get comfortable. In games 3 and 4, the officials let that slide for large portions of the game. Tonight, that didn't happen, and that's how Durant was able to shoot 16 free throws, and it also put PJ in a position where he was in a lot of foul trouble. Tucker played 33 minutes in this game, which is quite a bit, but he had to sit important stretches during the second half because he had times where he had 4 fouls in the third quarter and 5 fouls in the fourth quarter. Because of that, Coach Mike Budenholzer felt the need to sit him out, which I personally disagreed with, but it was a decision that the coach went with, and Durant's play was a big reason why PJ was put into that foul trouble. KD was constantly creating that contact, and that allowed him to get to the line as many times as he did. He also had a ridiculous shot-making game as he was able to fight through that contact and have a couple of and-ones that were just a little bit mind-blowing. In addition to that, he made some crazy shots even when the Bucks played clean defense and just had some outstanding contests. He was knocking down shots from the three-point line and in the mid-range all the same, and they were all very, very difficult shots. KD just proved himself to be the best difficult shot maker, and for my money, the single best player in the entire NBA tonight. This was a signature performance from him, and he completely killed the Bucks, regardless of who they win with as the primary defender. Obviously, Tucker drew that assignment for much of the night. I'm guessing that during the 33 minutes PJ was in the game, he spent all of them defending Durant, as whenever PJ was playing, the Bucks pretty much refrained from switching any kind of screening actions involving Durant. PJ was forced to fight through those screens and continue to stay on Kevin regardless of how good the screen that was set was. However, in the fourth quarter, when Budenholzer benched Tucker after he picked up his 5th foul, the Bucks went with Middleton in that assignment. That was an okay draw for Milwaukee, as Chris has had some success guarding KD both throughout this series and in the regular season matchups between these two teams. However, the Bucks did not go through with Middleton in that matchup as they went to a switch-heavy scheme where they were pretty much soft-switching every single screening action Durant was involved in. That was immediately quite troublesome for the Bucks, as the Nets frequently were targeting Pat Connaughton in those screening actions. KD did whatever he could to get Pat switched onto him, and while Connaughton does do a solid job of keeping opposing offensive players in front of him and has a decent wingspan, he's not nearly as lengthy as Chris Middleton, and he's not good enough with his footwork to keep Durant right where he needs him to be to get off a solid contest. I'm not sure that it would have mattered had the Bucks kept Middleton on him through those screening actions, but Connaughton was essentially dead meat as the Nets targeted him on 3 straight possessions. One of those led to free throws for Durant, and the next 2 led to pull-up three-pointers in Connaughton's face as Pat failed to get off an adequate shot contest. Durant killed Milwaukee in this game, and he deserves a ton of credit. However, I also think that the Bucks probably could have done some different things in terms of defending him, and I'm sure that Coach Mike Budenholzer will go back and watch that tape and really regret running that soft switching action. I think a potential adjustment we could see Milwaukee go with as this series continues is putting Giannis Antetokounmpo on Durant. This has been called for from pretty much anyone in the basketball world, from Bucks fans to the NBA on TNT guys to people that know more about the game than just about anyone. But Antetokounmpo is essentially the last option that the Bucks have yet to try. I don't think they should go for it right at the beginning of Game 6, as Tucker has been great on KD for most of this series. And if the Bucks have some officials that aren't going to be as whistle-friendly as these guys were tonight, there's a chance that we could see Tucker regain that level of effectiveness. However, if he gets in foul trouble again and the Bucks are having a hard time corralling Durant whenever PJ isn't on him, I think that the Giannis adjustment is something that the Bucks are going to have to do. I get that they love using him as an off-the-ball defender, and that certainly paid off in this game, as Giannis had a few huge blocks, including one on Jeff Green that was wildly impressive. But I think that stopping Durant is probably a bit more important than having a great off-the-ball defender, and the extra length that Giannis provides in that matchup is incredibly valuable when it comes to contesting Durant's jumper. So that's an adjustment that I think that Budenholzer should run out there, and I hope that we see it at some point in Game 6, even if I don't necessarily think it has to be something that happens right at the beginning. Durant also killed the Bucks with his passing in this game, as he did finish with those 10 assists. I think that the shot making is going to be the primary takeaway for people in this game, but he did have some really nice needle-threading passes in this game, including one standout to Bruce Brown where KD was driving towards the right side of the basket, and he found Brown on the complete opposite side of the paint, waiting on the left block. Durant made a really impressive across-his-body no-look pass, as we saw Brown corral the pass and have an easy finish. That forced a Mike Budenholzer timeout and gave the Nets even more momentum than they already had in that fourth quarter. So with that pass, Durant really put a thorn in the Bucks' side, and in general throughout this game, he did make some impressive passes, so I did want to briefly mention that as well. The Bucks also got lit up by the Nets role players. Brook Lopez was defending Blake Griffin for large portions of this game, and as we've seen throughout the past couple of years with the Bucks, Brook is mostly going to be playing a drop coverage when he's out there. That didn't change in this game, and unfortunately for the Bucks, we saw Blake Griffin have a bit of an outlier shooting performance. It wasn't as extreme as the shooting performance from Jeff Green, but we'll get to that a bit later. Griffin certainly made the Bucks pay for playing that drop, as he had 17 points while shooting 7 for 11 from the field and 3 for 6 from beyond the three-point line. The Nets were especially successful when involving him in a pick-and-roll action with either James Harden, who returned in this game, or Durant, as those two players were able to find Griffin on a pick-and-pop, and Blake made the Bucks pay with his catch-and-shoot ability. Jeff Green also really killed the Bucks in this game, and it just felt like he couldn't miss. He started off the game 7 for 7. He would miss his 8th three-pointer to finish the game 7 for 8 from beyond the arc, but that wasn't until after he had already piled up 27 points and really hurt the Bucks with his shooting ability. That is an outlier shooting performance, and throughout the game I was expecting Green to regress back towards his mean shooting percentage of between 38 and 40%. Jeff is a spectacular three-point shooter, but he's not nearly on the level that he showed tonight. Unfortunately, that regression didn't come until late for the Bucks, and because of that, Green played a huge role in the Bucks losing this game. Obviously, the biggest reason for this Milwaukee defeat was Durant, but the 44 points on 10 for 14 three-point shooting that came from Green and Griffin was a close second when it comes to reasons for this Bucks defeat. It is worth mentioning that some Nets struggled on the offensive end of the court. James Harden returned in this game, and he clearly wasn't at 100%. He had just 5 points on 1 for 10 shooting and went 0 for 8 from the three-point line while also being targeted by the Bucks on defense. He was probably a net negative for the Nets in this game, which makes it even more impressive that they won. But he did show his passing ability as he had 8 assists, and he opened up a few looks for the Nets that were unavailable to them at the latter portions of Game 4, where they were left without a true passing virtuoso like a Harden or an Irving, and instead it was Mike James handling the ball a lot of the time. Harden's passing ability opened up backdoor cuts for Kevin Durant, which was key in beating the Bucks' face guarding defense. Tucker a lot of the time was denying KD the pass on the perimeter, and because of that, the backdoor was open. We saw KD try to make that cut a few times in Game 3, but because the Nets ball handlers didn't have the passing ability necessary to find Durant, that play didn't really work. In Game 4, KD had a couple successful cuts, and Harden's passing really opened that up for him. Joe Harris, similar to Harden, also really struggled, and this is becoming a bit of a trend in this series. Harris shot just 2 for 11 from the field and 1 for 7 from beyond the three-point line. The Bucks have gotten bailed out with his struggles in this series, but eventually I think Harris is probably going to get hot one of these games, and that has me quite worried because in addition to everything KD is doing as a scorer, if Joe Harris is also knocking down three-pointers, watch out, the Bucks are in big trouble. Regression is going to come in both ways, as I talked about with Green. Eventually he's going to stop shooting this well from 3, but the same can be said with Harris. He's about a 45 to 50% three-point shooter, and in this series, I doubt he's shooting better than 30%. Regression is going to come positively for the Nets and negatively, and I'm worried that that positive regression is going to hurt the Bucks in a very big way. On offense, this was a game of ups and downs for Milwaukee. When the Bucks ran their sets through, they created some really great shots. Unfortunately, these plays were few and far between. This can be especially true when you look at the games for Jrue Holiday and Chris Middleton. Each of these two had solid statistical outputs, even if they were a bit underwhelming, but with the eye test, they were clearly worse than their numbers would indicate. Jrue had 19 points and 8 assists on 7 for 16 shooting. That's pretty close to his regular season averages this year, if not a little bit better in both the scoring and passing departments. However, in the second half, I thought Jrue really struggled as he continually forced up shots. This was a particular issue when we saw the Giannis-Jrue pick and roll. There were a couple situations where the Bucks were able to force a switch, as the Nets are more than happy to switch every screening action that they see. That's been true for this team throughout the season, and it was true again tonight. That meant that when someone like Landry Shamet was guarding Jrue Holiday and Kevin Durant was guarding Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Nets were going to switch that action. They ended up with Durant guarding Holiday and Shamet guarding Antetokounmpo. You can make a debate that, Holiday can beat Durant off the bounce, but KD has genuinely made all defense teams during his time in the league. Landry Shamet is a complete defensive liability, especially when guarding someone like Giannis. Holiday probably should have tried to find Giannis inside. Unfortunately, he didn't do so, and this happened more than once in the fourth quarter. Holiday instead settled for a pull-up jumper or a floater, and he was not able to get those to go as he really struggled in that fourth quarter. A particular bad shot that I can recall was an air ball he had from the elbow. It was a contested shot that came early in the shot clock and was simply not one that the Bucks needed. Chris Middleton was pretty much the same story in this game for Milwaukee. Once again, solid box score statistics as he had 25 points on 22 shots, but some of those shots were really ill-advised. The worst that I can remember was a contested jumper early in a possession late in the fourth quarter. I think there were around 3 minutes remaining with the Bucks down 4, and they had a chance to really start building some momentum had they gotten a good shot. Unfortunately, Chris forced up that mid-range jumper, and it bounced off the side of the backboard. The Nets got the rebound and got out in transition. I don't think they scored, but nonetheless, that was an ill-advised shot from Middleton, and we need Holiday and Chris to be playing at the top of their games at all times in order to knock off a Nets team when Kevin Durant is shooting the way he was. That wasn't the case in the second half today, and those two are going to have to play much better in Game 6 for the Bucks to really have a chance. The Bucks offense was best tonight when the ball was in Giannis's hands. Antetokounmpo finished with 34 points and 12 rebounds while shooting 14 for 22 from the field. He also shot 2 for 4 from the three-point line, which is 4 attempts more than he should be taking, but it is far less attempts than it was in the last 2 games, and he also made more of the three-pointers, so this is something I can live with much more than the 1 for 8 and 1 for 6 efforts that we saw in the prior 2 games. One interesting bullet point with Giannis's usage tonight was the way he was used. The Greek Freak had 3 offensive fouls in this game, and each of those came when he attacked from the top of the key. In those situations, his defenders like Blake Griffin and Jeff Green were able to slide in, get set, and take a charge on Giannis, which both put him in foul trouble and put him in a position to where the Nets were able to gain possession, obviously. Giannis was far more effective when the Bucks used him inside isolations. This allowed him to attack one-on-one while being able to use the baseline to avoid contact. Had the Nets defenders tried to slide in front of him, he simply could have spun and gotten himself in a position where he could use his right hand to easily score at the basket. Instead, the Nets defenders had to try to force him towards that baseline, and Giannis used that advantage to get to the block time and time again. This was particularly effective when the Bucks were running those pick and roll actions, which forced the Nets into switches. When Giannis was setting a screen for Drew, and he was able to get someone like a Landry Shamet or a Bruce Brown on him, and Drew made the nice entry pass into Giannis, Antetokounmpo was easily able to take advantage of those matchups. He also forced a few fouls from the Nets and put Jeff Green in foul trouble, as Green had 5 fouls in this game. Unfortunately, Giannis was just 4 for 7 from the line again in this one, so he wasn't particularly great on free throws, but it was good to see him continue to have some interesting usage and to have some success in that usage. Other than that, I thought that another really useful play that the Bucks ran with Giannis was a dribble handoff with Giannis and a small guard. This was a play where Giannis was dribbling the ball at the top of the key, and a guard came off of a pin down while running behind Giannis. On that play, Giannis handed the ball off to the guard. On one play, it was Bryn Forbes, and on 2 others, it was Pat Connaughton. On each of the 3 plays I can remember, this ended in an easy bucket for the Bucks guard, as Forbes came away with a 3, and Connaughton came away with 2 easy layups. Pat C actually had a really good game for the Bucks in this one, which was great to see because it was his second straight nice game off the bench. He played 32 minutes, which is probably a bit much for some Bucks fans' liking, but I think he earned those minutes. He made the hustle plays that he usually makes, as he had 6 rebounds and 1 block, but he also provided some offensive firepower for the Bucks, which is definitely not what you expect. He had 10 points in this game and took advantage of that curl play that I talked about earlier, but he also was able to attack a closeout, which allowed him to get to the basket for an and one, and he did make one of his 3-point attempts as well. Pat is important in this game because he's one of the Bucks' 6 best players and is probably going to be in their closing lineup, especially if they go with the small ball lineup. I think that he's important in this series, and it was good to see him play as well as he did in each of the past 2 games. Finally, I want to talk about Coach Mike Budenholzer a little bit because he made some head-scratching decisions, if that's what you want to say. The first of these was not playing Bobby Portis. This is the one that I understand because Portis is a bit of a defensive liability and he hasn't been super effective on offense, but I do think that he has a chance to really provide the Bucks with some scoring punch off the bench. He's really great at punishing switches in the post, and considering that the Nets run switching actions on basically every screen and roll, he was going to be able to get some solid matchups. Portis is someone who I think they could go back to in Game 6, although it's not necessarily the biggest of deals. Something that is a bigger deal is that Budenholzer benched Drew Holiday for too long in the first half after Holiday picked up his second foul. Drew only played 34 minutes in this game, which is a significant decline from the 44-plus minutes he played in both Game 3 and Game 4. I get that the Bucks played well throughout the first half, but had they been able to have Holiday out there a bit more, they probably could have built up a lead closer to 25 points, and if that were the case, it's far less likely that they would have squandered that lead than it was that they would squander the 16-point lead that they had in reality. In addition to that, Budenholzer played Pat Connaughton and Brook Lopez over PJ Tucker down the stretch. PJ did have 5 fouls, but with 6 minutes left in the fourth quarter, you're just going to have to ride it out and risk him picking up that sixth. I think that was an issue because of the soft switching that the Bucks ran, as I mentioned earlier, and also because Lopez isn't going to be able to come up as high on screening actions as someone like a Giannis or a Chris Middleton is if they're defending the player setting a screen on Durant. I think that was a calculation by Bud that was an error in my opinion. He either could have played the big three guys out there with PJ and Brook, which would have been a bigger lineup, or the big three guys out there with PJ and Pat, which would have been a smaller one. Either of those would have been a viable alternative to what he actually did, and I think they both would have been an upgrade, so I think that was yet another mistake from Budenholzer. And finally, I think that the biggest mistake he made was failing to calm the team down during that difficult third quarter where they were outscored by 10 points and really struggled to get anything going in a positive fashion offensively. He should have been able to communicate that they had to run the offense better and make sure they were getting good shots at the basket every time. He also probably should have adjusted to Durant making all the shots and put the longer defender and Giannis on him, but that's one that is a bit more defensible because PJ and Chris had done such a good job in games 3 and 4. The Bucks players have to be better, but Bud also has to put his players in a better position to succeed in order for them to win this series. And by the way, this series is not over. The Bucks still have a very clear path to victory in this series. On offense, they have to run more Giannis side isos, more pick and rolls, take advantage of the switches, and they have to force up less tough jump shots early in the shot clock. On defense, Milwaukee has to stay closer to shooters, stay out of foul trouble, and find some way to slow down Kevin Durant. That's obviously going to be the hardest one, but if they can do so, I give them a pretty solid shot at winning this series, especially if James Harden struggles like he did tonight and Kyrie Irving does not return. That's all easier said than done, but it's far from impossible for the Bucks to do. Milwaukee has to lock in and take care of business on their home court Thursday night, and if they can do that, it comes down to one game for all the marbles, and who knows what happens in that type of coin flip affair. Let me know what you thought of this game in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching all the way through to this point, as this video dragged on quite a bit more than I would have liked it to. However, this was the biggest game of the Bucks season, and I had a ton to talk about. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you did enjoy this video. I'm sure that you did if you stuck around this long, so please subscribe if you're a fellow Bucks believer. This is the place for you. I think that I've covered everything that I wanted to cover, so that's going to be it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I will see you all again very soon.